right. Good morning, everyone. Jebeh Edmunds here on a wonderful, fabulous episode of the Cultural Curriculum Chat podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, Mrs. Edmunds Cultural Corner, I have in our guest chair today the Dr. Ericka Goodwin, best-selling author, host of the podcast Better with Dr. Ericka. I was her guest earlier this year, and I'm just honored to have her on our show today. We are going to talk educators all about SEL and how we can be more inclusive educators with that. She is a notable adult and adolescent psychiatrist and hails from the East Coast in Georgia, and I cannot wait to talk more. So let's get into it. Welcome, Dr. Ericka.
Thank you. And I'm going to warn you, your listeners, I am coming from Atlanta. My allergies are on 10, and any of you that have been down here know that that can happen. So you might see a little blinking and this Kleenex come out. I'm not crying because you're making me sad. It's my allergies.
Thank you for the heads up. Thank you. Thank you. So, Dr. Ericka, just give our audience just a little bit of your story and your upbringing before we get into it.
Sure. Well, the first thing is I'm originally from St. Louis, Missouri, so I am natively a Midwesterner. So I was born the only child to totally doting parents, and I always like to say that my appearing in the universe was a big deal because my parents had very close friends, and there were like six men. They're all saying they were my dad,
Oh,
which made for an interesting position for my mother to be in. And ironically, as I made my introduction into the wonderful universe, my dad's back went out and he actually missed my delivery. Uh, but, I had a really great childhood, loving family. Everything was great. And then I decided I was coming to Atlanta to go to Spelman College, where I stayed and I did med school at Emory. Then I did adult psychiatry training in Morehouse School of Medicine. Then decided to take a little sojourn up to DC and do a congressional fellowship, and then did my child fellowship at Harvard in Boston. And I went back home, was hanging out there for a while, then became a traveling psychiatrist, traveling all around the country, seeing people. And one of the things I often saw is I just really wasn't happy with the mental health care that a lot of people got, especially people of color. It just was all over the country. The one consistent thing was a lot of times people just were not getting the best quality care, to the point where I even saw some mental health struggles in my family. And someone actually had a heart attack before the age of 40 due to mismanagement of their medications. Don't worry, they're okay now. And I was traveling around the country, and then I decided I'm going to have a job, like a more regular job. And, I think everyone's been there, that time where you're checking all the boxes, I'm the first doctor in the family. I'm successful, all those good things. I'm living the dream. Then I got to what I thought was my dream job. And I don't know if anybody out there is used to having your dream job. You wake up and you realize your dream job is a nightmare. And I
Yes.
was in one of those positions where I was working all the time, seeing all these patients. I wasn't hardly getting paid. And it was just going sideways. And then I realized at one point I could sit on my couch and make as much money as I am going to work all the time. We had a
Mhm.
four-person call group that went down to three, which meant I was on call all the time. I was seeing people in hospitals all over. It was just doing the absolute most. And I remember there was this morning I was getting ready for work, and at that time I had probably my favorite shower I've ever had. It had like this most beautiful glass green tile, and I remember sitting on the tile in the shower and just tasting the salt mixed with tears of just the idea of going to work. And I don't know how many people out there have had those moments where, it just going to work feels like torture. And even though you may feel like you were called to do this work and you were going to live in your purpose, but something about your job just is not the jam. And I remember just sitting there thinking, I just can't do this, and at that point, then I had to start taking the steps to leave, which meant overall, when it was all said and done, I gave away over $200,000 worth of services that I did not get reimbursed for 8 months, and paid. I can't remember. It was like, by the time I stopped getting paid because I needed attorneys, I think I didn't get paid. It was somewhere between 50 and 60 something thousand dollars to leave. But the thing I learned was I never want anybody else to feel kind of helpless, or that, you're trying to live your dream, you're trying to live your purpose, and the environment you're in is just toxic.
Yeah. And like you said, at what cost, right?
Yes. And I
Hmm.
just realized I just didn't want anybody else to feel like that, just to feel that helplessness, and also feel like you're not valued, that you're working hard, you're doing these things to make a difference, and you don't have anything to show for it but bags under your eyes and feeling tired and collapsing on the couch. So that kind of brought me to where I am, to Dr. Ericka, who's the Harvard trained psychiatrist, author, podcast host, and corporate speaker. That, I'm just really passionate about helping people be better, do better, and live better. And being at a place now where I can work with people, and especially with my podcast, give people tools so that you can put you back in your life, because you're busy. You're giving to your friends, you're giving to your family, you're showing up for work, you're showing up for everybody, but you're not showing up for yourself. So my big thing is putting you in that position where you can start showing up for yourself and be the main character in your life instead of like an extra.
I love that, Dr. Erica. And yes, your show gives us practical tools, and we'll have all your information in the show notes of how to, like you said, live better, be better, and do better. And you are the epitome of that. And I'm sorry that it happened as the catalyst for you to change, but it is in good measure and overflowing of how you are helping and impacting so many of us every day with your work and your passion. So thank you for that. And thank you for having that aha moment in that shower going, this can't be my routine moving forward. So thank you, thank you. When you're talking about seeing the mental health crisis, especially with our families and our children of color, what has influenced you to share your voice with all of us, and especially educators, to see the signs? Yeah. Are there like any things that us educators could look for if we know a student really needs help?
Well, one of the biggest things that has just inspired me is just the fact that this stuff is everywhere.
Mhm.
That this isn't, I've worked in so many different environments. I've trained in public, I've trained in private, I've worked public, I've worked those high-end cashed rehabs. I've worked some of
Mhm.
everywhere almost. And the thing is it doesn't matter how much money you have, it doesn't matter what your race is, it doesn't matter your religion, it doesn't matter your gender. Everybody's struggling. And I
So
think
true.
that's what really inspires me, is seeing how many people are struggling, and then seeing that gap between when people start having symptoms, especially children, and when they actually get help. And the fact that there's a quote, and I'm not going to say the whole thing, but it's like by Benjamin E. Mays. It's like, I only have a minute, 60 seconds in it. And the thing is you can't get time back. So that gap from when people are starting to have simple symptoms and having impairments to when they're actually getting treatment and are having some resolution of symptoms, that's time people can't get back. And
Mhm.
wanting to help people have tools so they're not struggling unnecessarily, because that's time you're not going to get back. That's, for kids, they start having difficulties. They're not paying attention. So what, they're getting behind in school. And what's one thing our school system just has difficulty with is, if you don't have parents with money that can get really good tutors or send you to Kumon or Sylvan or something to get you caught up, the educational system just hasn't always been equipped with tools and resources to help someone get caught up.
Yes, that's
And
so true.
the thing is they're getting behind in schoolwork. So then, a lot of times, unless it's something like social studies where you're learning new stuff every time, well, if you didn't learn your foundation skills, you're not going to do well as you go forward. If you don't have a good foundation in reading, well, you're going to have difficulty English language arts. You're going to suck in social studies. All these
Yeah,
things, and
science.
yes, and all these things that just kind of pile up. And then also, if you're having difficulty and you're not engaging well, you're going to have difficulty forming good attachments and interpersonal relationships. It's just seeing how something that looks like it should be in a bubble ends up affecting everything. And
Yes.
thing with teachers is you all spend so much time with kids, and we're in an environment now with kind of the fact that our economy is the way it is, people are working a lot, you spend the most time, but having teachers and educators with as much information and resources as possible is just helpful for the whole system. But the one thing I do want to say is it's not just on educators, and I think sometimes we want you all to be as prepared as you can, but I also feel like sometimes the system puts unearned and unnecessary pressure on you all to be the ultimate people that figure everything out, that come up with solutions and fix it all. And
Mm.
and that technically is not your job.
No, and it's not fair. And it is that just like you said, that unpaid, but the expectation of how come you didn't recognize that, Johnny was struggling. It's like I was recognizing it. I did tell the families don't have the extra resources to get the help. And usually, too, as an educator, in my experience, the boiling point, you can see it kind of bubble in the defensiveness, and I'm fine. But you can see the bubbling up of the frustration. Oh, I can't get that passage, or he's missing school, or she's missing school. And then there could be trauma at home that is out of our control as well. Those are other factors that we're trying to, like you say, prepare them for their next level of schooling or their next level of life, and we just don't have the tools or the resources or the expertise. If I had you sitting next to me in my class, Dr. Ericka, we would have been like, yes, you help with the mental health, I'll help with the standards. And we'd be that power team, but we just don't. And thank you for recognizing that yeah, teachers would love to if they could, but they don't have the necessary tools, again, in our education system to help our kids. And it's that helpless feeling too, as educators. We feel helpless. Like we would love to make sure those students have what they need, but we don't have the capacity. And again, us teachers are also burnt out and stressors as well. So that mix of that, how do you navigate as a psychiatrist with your clients of, I know you're right. We are all struggling. And how do you help us have that beacon of hope with your practice?
Well, the first thing is I look at my calling and my job as a psychiatrist as to literally be a beacon of hope and to hold on to hope until you can hold on to it for yourself. So part of it is just being able to reassure people that we're going to work together until we find a solution. And also helping people understand the importance of being present in all these different spaces, because the one thing that gets difficult, especially for educators, is you don't have the tools to fix everything, which means there are other stakeholders that are extremely important, including, your kids are actually stakeholders and their parents.
Yes.
And it's one of those things where part of it is that education, that the buck can't continually be passed. The parents can't pass the buck off to the education system. At some point, you have to be present and figure out what's going to help you fill those gaps. And for a lot of people, that may even be, for some of my parents, that there's a lot going on with their kids and they're having difficulty keeping up because I think there's the group of people that are kind of checked out because they're overstimulated and they're doing the most. You know,
Mhm.
that honestly they have all these kids, they're working all these hours and they probably don't really have the time. And it's not all fueled by survival. And then you have the
Yeah.
families also that, the cost of living right now is so outrageous that you can have two parents that are working extremely hard, that are barely making enough money to put food on the table and keep the lights on, and they're having to work two or three jobs, and it's hard for them to be everywhere. So I think part of it is figuring out what people's capacity is, and then figuring out how to fill the gaps. But at some point, you have to be present in one way or another. But I've
Yeah.
also, and we've also
Mhm.
seen times where you have the family where someone's working day and night doing all this stuff, and you can talk to their kids and their kids still feel like they're present even though they're gone a lot. And I think
Yeah.
first part is people being people being present, and then also
Yes.
figuring out ways to communicate with the education system with the families.
Yes,
And
that I love that. I love the presence and the communication is so important. Yes. Was there another point?
well,
Sorry, I just
and
got
that
excited because
communication
those are, yeah.
is huge. And the, and some of it's stuff that people don't think about, but you have, if you're not tech savvy, because right now a lot of communication, especially out of COVID, it's a lot of there are these digital platforms that the kids' grades or their
Yes.
things are in, and they're
Yes.
that way. Is that if you're not digitally savvy, I need you to ask for help and not just assume you can't do it or you can't follow along. And then if it needs to be a point where you're not digitally savvy or you do not have reliable internet or data usage, that you can have a conversation with the educators and then possibly go back to old school where someone's sending a little note home or doing phone calls.
Yes.
But the thing is,
Yes.
someone doesn't know if you're not in the portal.
Hmm. That part.
And some of it's basic stuff like that because I realize a lot of things have changed. So, when you need help actually asking for it so someone can help you. And I think in this age, the role of school advocates is even bigger than it probably was.
Yes, yes.
School
And I think
advocates.
that push for more school advocates to help be that buffer from the school to the parent, I think is really, important as well. Oh, so good, Dr. Erica. Another thing when you're talking about being present, there's some things that we did in SEL, social emotional learning, for people who are listening that aren't in the education field. There's lots of programs out there that we would, do an SEL in the beginning of our day, a part of our morning, getting together meetings. There's teachers that we would do yoga and breathing exercises with kids, especially before a test. Are there any other strategies that educators could use to help those kids be present and more centered?
Well, and one thing, the funny
Mhm.
thing is, I can't take credit for this. I saw this. I'm going to admit, every once in a while, I am on the social media, and there was
Yeah,
a clip where I think it was Michael Bublé was talking about how his 6-year-old daughter loves Snoop Dogg, and
I
and
saw
yes,
that. Yeah,
and then
that's a
we're
good
talking about.
one.
I love that affirmation song. I actually downloaded the whole little record, so some days I'm sitting here listening to,
Yeah,
my family loves me so much.
but yes.
Feelings matter,
Yes,
And
yes.
I think it's just finding those tools that, we talk about them probably even more like in leadership spaces, but translate over there, such as, positive music or affirmations. I love the idea of doing small meditations or things with kids. Maybe even doing gratitude statements or things like
Yes.
that. And, taking advantage of, when there are times where people can actually be grounding and using grounding techniques in class and, also making sure people's feet are on the floor, sometimes just to ground, I think are huge. But I also think one of the huge things is one thing are the things that we do with kids. The other thing is that what we do with staff. Because the other thing is when we're dealing with social emotional learning and emotional intelligence, is there's an element of making sure that as educators and staff, because the thing is everyone that touches a school or educational platform impacts these kids from the lunchroom people to the
Yes.
clean to the front, the front desk person to the person control outside is being in a place where everyone's doing what they need to be regulated to begin with, because
Yes.
it's hard to help people with social emotional learning if you're dysregulated.
That's it. And you're right, everybody needs to be regulated and maybe having more staff taking that into practice. So many of us is like, okay, here's a new SEL program, download it. Here's the video, it's 10 minutes. Here's some worksheets. But again, what is there for the staff to, purposefully have us get grounded and reconnect before the kids come in? I think that's really important. And for our mental health too, to get ourselves centered before they start coming in, I think is really important. Oh, I love that. I love that. How can our families benefit with grounding too? Because we're talking about in this classroom and those touch points, but what about the adults at home? Are there any suggestions that you have for them
Yeah.
to be grounded and present?
And one of the
Mhm.
things I love is, just as we would send, and it's so weird. I'm still trying to get used to it. So many of the kids I work with don't have homework. I'm like,
I know. My boys don't eat some of them. I'm
well,
just like, what?
well, the hard thing I'm finding is these kids don't have homework, and then one day they do, and they don't know what to do with it. They're like,
Yes,
home is for home, school is for school. I don't even know how to manage homework. I shouldn't even have homework. And then when they get
yes.
to the point where they actually have homework, they're ill prepared. So I'm hoping at some point we can find, yeah,
A
I don't
balance.
see,
Yes,
I know there were times I had kids that they'd be up all night doing homework. I think that's inappropriate. But at
yes.
some point, you have to learn some study habits so that by the time you get to college, you can actually
That
handle
part.
handle a workload. But I think
Yes.
it's
Time
also
management.
important that some of the homework could be these social emotional learning things or um, or emotional intelligence types of activities, and then you turn it into something that the families are doing together.
Love
So,
that.
instead
Yeah.
of it being the only thing people have to do, take home is academic or just read something tonight, is to start having some of these habits be ones that parents are working on with their children. One thing that's huge is having a nighttime routine, also, and reading is a sticky point for some reason. I don't know at what time all of a sudden it just seemed like there was just an outrageous amount of kids that are having challenges reading. But, I'm also a fan of, even as an adult, if you're a parent and you hate reading, it sucks, but you're gonna have to act like you like it. Um,
Ah,
to make
yes.
to make it fun, because I feel like reading is something that also, everyone talks about journaling, but if you have difficulty reading and have difficulty with language skills, you're not
How
going to
can you write it down?
you
Mhm.
know, so just sometimes rolling those things into fun activities where everyone does it. Like, I grew up in a
Yes.
family where everyone read. So there'd be times you'd see the living room. I'd have a book. My cousins would have a book. My grandmother would have a book. My parents had books. My grandmother's favorite things to do outside of reading were crossword puzzles and Scrabble. So it's just making some of these things not feel so stressful, you know.
Yeah, that's big. That's big. And to for your point of the reading and why there's such an influx and with my research too, with the mandates of different states and their reading standards and what is going to be pushed and what is going to be pushed back. And that's a whole different episode of the frustrations of why kids are not, apt to read because now with the screen time and all that and again, a lot of those kids get slipped through the cracks. And if they don't have the passage or they can't guess the word, we still move them up to a different grade. And then again, that piles up. And then again, their mental health of I don't want to read in front of the kids with front of my peers because they're going to tease me because I don't know. So there's a lot there too. But yeah, my point is too, and I really like how you said of having that routine, that consistency of what kids can expect will definitely lower their anxiety, correct? Because they'll know what to expect coming home. Maybe we read or listen to an audiobook together as a family. Maybe we go on a walk, but something calming, I think, will really help, especially with the pressures of day-to-day school.
It,
I think
it
that's great. Mm.
And the other thing is, I think something that's underutilized is sometimes, either those handouts or worksheets, or they have little things you can stick on your wall with like the little faces of emotions or an emotion wheel. Is
Yeah.
I think the other thing is helping kids get practice of naming emotions. So, it may be when you check in the morning, or maybe you might do a check in when I'm still a fan of, if people can, sitting down to dinner with the whole family together, is asking, and it may be something someone just picks out what they feel and says something about it. But some of it is getting practice doing it. It's not something that has to be an exercise of perfection, but the more people get practice of naming their emotions and naming their feelings, the easier it is for them to identify emotions and then link that to what they need, so you don't have the issues with a lot of the emotional dysregulation we see in homes or in schools. A lot of times it's kids can't identify how they're feeling, so it typically comes out often is either really angry or they totally shut down and just are staring at the wall.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love all these things. Being present, consistency, emotional, just even verbalizing your emotion or a picture. Some of our kids are visual learners, and to identify what this feeling is and speaking out about it. And I love how you talked about too the capacity of the child. If they feel like it's too much for them to recognize, maybe they could take a walk and do a lap in the hallway with the past just to kind of get themselves back to center to learn. There's all kinds of tips and tricks up our teacher sleeves that we can use and should utilize to, again, not make that child feel ostracized or othered, but to recognize going, I know this kid, they might be at a different home on the weekend because they're in a two-parent household, and this child is, more amped up when they're at this side of the family. So I'm going to give them time to just kind of settle in, starting the new day, things like that. We already are reflective on of our students. So thank you for reiterating that of knowing their capacity, being consistent, having that family buy-in, families asking for help. I feel like there's a lot of shame of that too, of I'm supposed to understand it and help my child. And I feel like if I do ask for help, then I'm going to be judged. And it's like, teachers would love to help, but if we don't know what we don't know, then that's where we end up too. Oh, before we go, Dr. Ericka, are there any final tips or thoughts that our listeners and viewers could get from you to move forward today?
Um, I have two.
Okay.
One is circling back to something you just said, and I think it's really important, is one of the things that to really have the ideal educational environment is bringing in, and I love how now at this part of my career, I start learning business terms because I'm like, oh, we could use this other places. I think overall you want to create psychological safety in the school and for the
Yes.
kids and creating a culture of which parents can let people know what's going on, because just as it happens with adults that an example is you can have someone that is depressed and struggling. Well, if you don't know they're depressed and struggling, they're going to look like they're not getting their tasks done, they're not meeting expectations, they may look disengaged, you may think they're disinterested and they don't care, but they're depressed. They're depressed
Yes.
very differently. And I think there has to be a point where we're able to create a culture where families are comfortable talking to educators about what's actually going on, because then you have the knowledge to meet the child where they are. If you don't know they're shuffling from house to house or something extra is going on, well, then you don't know, so you can't support the kid as well. If there's an issue and there's just a huge amount of food insecurity, it's there are just all these different kinds of things. Or mama, or my I have some kids, they call their grandparents pappy. If
Yeah.
they're in the hospital, it's just little things that when you know what's going on, it's a lot easier to meet a kid where they are and to read it correctly. And I think just as that happens with adults, you can misread things very easily with kids if you don't know the context.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
if someone doesn't have power or they're having issues, well, someone may not be doing their homework later in the day. If they have no internet, well, they might not be doing this. Doesn't matter if you have a Chromebook if you have no internet, no power. So
Exactly.
it's just all those little things that when we're able to create partnerships with families and educators, it allows people to help better and also to lend what resources we do have in the educational environment to help. So, I'd say the biggest one is actually asking for help. And the second is if you have a question or you feel like, ooh, my kid's not is having struggling with something, or it comes up a lot with kind of bullying or even just social skills deficits, talk to someone.
Yes.
Let the school know you have a concern and follow up on it. And a lot of times I feel like things are, right now, a lot of these systems are overrun, that, sometimes the squeaky wheel gets heard,
Mhm, mhm.
making requests in writing.
I love that. Make
Um,
the request in writing, asking for help, being transparent. And educators too, just checking in with the family. A quick phone call goes a long way. It's like, I'm just, that child isn't acting like themselves, or is there something I should know, or anything I can help support, or get you a phone number or a resource that can, it can help with that. I think that too, just having that parent teacher connection and keeping those communication lines open just to show that you really are interested in their child's well-being.
can
So,
I get one more?
yes,
Okay.
yes,
And also for parents is you have to take care of yourself. That
yes.
raising a human is probably one of the most challenging and more rewarding things you can ever do. It takes a lot of time and energy and patience. And it is difficult to do if you are not taking care of yourself. So it means you need to get sleep, you need to eat in a healthy way, um, and you need to take care of whatever is going with you physically or mental health wise. If you need some mental health treatment, get it. Um, Take care of your blood pressure, get your physicals, make sure that you are taking care of yourself to put yourself in the best position to take care of your children.
I love that. I love that. And now, where can friends find you, Dr. Erica,
Okay, there
podcast host?
There are a
Yes.
couple places to find me. One is you can find me on the socials, not as much on the Twitter or X or whatever it is these days.
Mhm. All right.
But on all social media, I'm Dr. Erica, DoctorEricka. My parents use all the letters. And my podcast is Better with Dr. Erica. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. It's Better with Dr. Erica. You'll
Yes,
see.
and I will have all of your socials on that. And friends, her biggest tagline at the end of every episode is to give yourself a hug. And oh yes, I do. I have to pull over in my car because I know I got to be safe and give myself a hug after each episode. I love your energy, Dr. Erica. Thank you again. I'm
Oh,
so honored that you wanted to take the time to be on my show. And everybody else, thank you again for watching and listening on the Cultural Curriculum Chat podcast and Mrs. Edmonds Cultural Corner. I'll see you next time.